Welcome back. Thanks so much for being with me. You can probably tell I've got some respiratory issues going on, but I do appreciate you being with me. Well, we have been discussing at length the correlation between resurrection and kingdom. I've shown you from both the Old Covenant as well as the New that the full arrival, the consummation, if you please, of the kingdom is inextricably tied to the time of the resurrection. I've also shared with you, both Old Testament and New, that consummation of the kingdom was to be at the end of Old Covenant Israel's age, not at the end of time. I want to shift gears now and begin a new element of our study in regard to 1 Corinthians 15. As you know, we're doing thematic studies, not verse by verse, but thematic. There's such a fascinating theme in 1 Corinthians 15. I'm going to skip over one thing that Paul says, and I'm going to come back to it just a little bit later. But Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 52, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, for the trumpet will sound, and the dead shall be raised, incorruptible, and we shall be changed. Paul here says that the resurrection would be at the, quote, last trumpet. Now, here is a classic example of how it is so tremendously helpful for us to understand Hebraic thought. Now remember, folks, the church at Corinth was established in the Jewish synagogue. They knew the scriptures. They knew the Torah. They knew the Tanakh. And thus when Paul makes these comments like this, the last trumpet, they were not modern Grecian trained people like you and I are, basically. They were Hebrews, by and large. I'm not denying that some pagans had been converted, but the church was established in the synagogue among people that knew the Old Testament. So when Paul uses the language of a trumpet, he is drawing on the rich, full imagery of the Old Testament. Now, in Israel's history, the sounding of trumpets was very, very significant. According to Numbers chapter 10, there were generally considered to be about 5 different reasons for the sounding of trumpets. There was the call for assembly. In other words, if some major important event had to be discussed, you sounded the trumpet. You sounded the trumpet for the festal occasions, for the beginning, and even for the conclusion of the feast days of Israel. That's very, very, very important right here in 1 Corinthians 15:52. You sounded the trumpet to gather for the time of war. And so as you can see, the sounding of the trumpet in Israel's history was very significant. Even in the book of Joel, for instance, Joel chapter 2, verse 1, sound the trumpet. Well, this trumpet was a call to war because Yahweh had called together his army, which was a locust plague, by the way, according to Joel 2:25. And now the battle had begun. Yahweh was at war with Israel. And so the call of the trumpet to sound the trumpet was made. Oh, but wait. The Lord then called on Israel that if they would repent, if they would turn back to him, if they would turn back to obedience of the law, he said, sound the trumpet. Call for a festival occasion. Because, again, if they repented, God would restore them. So here we have 2 different applications of the sounding of the trumpet. When we talk about eschatology, there is an incredibly important Old Covenant prophecy of the sounding of the trumpet, and it's found in Isaiah chapter 27. Now, I've shared with you before this context. Isaiah 24 through 27 is called the Little Apocalypse, because the New Testament writers quote from it, they cite it, they allude to it, they echo it over and over and over again in their predictions of the coming of the Lord, the judgment, and the resurrection. In Isaiah 25, we have prediction of the resurrection. Isaiah 26:19, prediction of the resurrection. Isaiah 27, watch this now, Isaiah chapter 27, verse 13. It shall be in that day is the day of the Lord of chapter 26, 20 and 21. It is the day of the resurrection of 26:19. In that day, the great trumpet shall be blown. They will come who are about to perish in the land of Assyria, they who are outcast in the land of Egypt, and shall worship the Lord in the holy mount of Jerusalem. Okay, right here in Isaiah, in a context of resurrection, in which the resurrection is the key eschatological element, we have the prediction of the sounding of the great trumpet. Now, listen, you have to know this. The ancient rabbis, virtually without exception, far as I can tell, applied Isaiah 27:13 to the time of the resurrection, the great day of the Lord. Well, I already know it's the day of the Lord because of chapter 26. It's the day of the Lord for the destruction of Satan, chapter 27, 1 and 2. Yeah, this is resurrection. Okay, so here we have the sounding of the great trumpet at the time of the resurrection. Well, let's see here. In Matthew 24, Jesus has been asked about by his disciples the sign of his presence, the sign of the end of the age. Well, is it the resurrection at the coming of the Lord and the end of the age? Yeah. And the disciples are asking for a sign of that. Jesus gave the Great Commission and its completion and the abomination of desolation as signs of his coming and the end of the age. But I want you to notice verse 29 and following. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, that's the great tribulation leading up to the fall of Jerusalem. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man, the sign of the Son of Man. What did they ask about? The sign. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the cloud of heaven with power and great glory. Watch this. He will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Folks, that's Isaiah 27:13. Well, when would this take place? Verse 34, verily I say unto you, this generation will not pass until all of these things are fulfilled. So Isaiah 27, a passage that serves as the source of Paul's resurrection doctrine in 1 Corinthians 15, foretold the resurrection at the sounding of the great trumpet. Jesus, directly echoing Isaiah 27:13, said the sounding of the great trumpet of Isaiah 27:13 would be in his generation. Therefore, the resurrection of 1 Corinthians 15 was to be in Jesus' generation. Listen, I cover this and a whole lot more in a discussion of Isaiah 27, Matthew 24, 1 Corinthians 15, in my book, The Resurrection of Daniel, chapter 12, verse 2, Fulfilled or Future. Look, this imagery of the sounding of the great trumpet at the time of the resurrection is absolute definitive proof that the resurrection was in AD 70. And we have more on that, so we'll see you on the flip side.